Welcome to Executive Leaders Radio, your spot in the corner office, the radio show where executives share their secrets to success. Executive Leaders Radio.
You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen, with my co-hosts, Shannon Lane, Newmark, Pat Riley, USI, Frank Hennessy, Premier Planning Group, Matthew Shapiro, Obermeyer, Ben Drummond, D2 Integrated Solutions, and David Epstein in Intelligence Staffing. And we have a great lineup of guests for you in our show today. Matthew, will you please give us the rundown?
I would love to, Herb. We're starting off with Annie Allman. She's the general manager and CEO of my favorite lunch spot and tourist attraction in Philadelphia, the Reading Terminal Market. We're moving on with Rob Ray, the co-founder of Littus. After that, we have John Cohn. He's the CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceuticals. And we're wrapping up today with Wamis Singhatat, who's the CEO and CTO of ActiveProtective.
Let's get to know our first guest, Annie Allman, general manager and CEO of Reading Terminal Market. Annie, what is the Reading Terminal Market?
The Reading Terminal Market is a 128-year-old historic public market serving fresh food to the city of Philadelphia for over a century. We are also one of the #1 tourist attractions and visitors destinations in the city.
All righty. Where are you from originally? How many brothers and sisters? Where are you in the pecking order?
Sure. I grew up in Homer, Alaska, a small fishing town on the Kenai Peninsula, and I am the last of 4.
Youngest.
I have an older sister, unfortunately passed away, and I have 2 older brothers.
And tell me, 8 to 14, what kind of stuff were you up to?
I was running around the Homer Spit on the Homer Harbor. I was in the gym as a terrible gymnast, and I was one of the first girls to play Little League in my town.
Mm-hmm. Matthew?
Annie, tell us about your father.
Sure. My dad, Jim, was a World War II vet. He came out of the war, started a very successful maritime construction company, which unfortunately he lost the entire business when I was 3. And he went back to his roots as a commercial fisherman.
That must have been traumatic that he lost a business and had to, what you call, go back to his roots of fishing. Tell me about that.
Sure. We lost everything. We moved out of Anchorage, went to a small town in Homer, moved into a trailer, and my dad took up with his passion, and so got to see a dad every day get up, work hard in a dangerous occupation, doing something he loved.
So I'm curious, having watched your father go through that, losing the business and then going back to fishing, tell me what that has to do with dealing with all the vendors who own the stalls in the Reading Terminal Market.
I think it just created incredible empathy for me, especially seeing people come out of this pandemic. I know what it's like to be in a family where your fortunes rise and fall every day. You've got to put everything into it. And oftentimes things that are happening are out of your hands.
Frank?
Annie, you mentioned that you were a gymnast for 6 years, which is a pretty big commitment. What does it take to make that commitment, and how did that help develop you?
And I was terrible. Sometimes you just have to keep grinding at it.
So grinding, how does grinding help you relate to a community of business owners?
It does. So not every day. You're not going to get a gold medal every day, but you got to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Shannon?
Hey, how young were you when you first got interested in hospitality?
Sure. So I didn't really come into hospitality being attracted to it that way. I came into the casino business coming out of an MBA program. I did not want to work with a bunch of MBAs. I grew up in a very real environment, and then I worked on the racetrack. And so I was attracted to an organization and an industry where I spent a lot of time with customers, with frontline people, and that's what brought me into it.
So it was about the people.
I think I like characters. I like stories. I like background. And I like to try to understand where people come from and why they are the way they present themselves today. What led them to that?
Ben?
Annie, could you tell us more about what it was like growing up in a small town of Homer, Alaska? You mentioned running around the harbor. You mentioned mud pies. Tell us more about that experience.
Sure. It was an incredible place full of, oddly enough, intellectuals and hardworking people, artists. It was just an incredible community where you felt very supported and you felt very free. The community put their money into the kids. I attended my first semester of college purely on scholarships from the community.
What did you learn from that sense of community, that tie to a place that you bring with you today in your role at the Reading Terminal Market?
You've got to meet people where they're at. You have to support them, and you've got to give them room that sometimes, people bring lots of stuff with them, baggage, problems, complex relationships, and you've got to be able to navigate your way through that.
David?
So family fishing business, thoroughbred racing, casino executive, what are the nuances and processes that you now bring to Reading Terminal?
Sure. I think you have to have an acute view of details with a broader view for how that plays into the whole picture. If you let that little bump on a horse get away from you, it will turn into something that is crippling, literally. If you stick a Band-Aid on a pump and you take that boat out and you get in a rough sea, you're in trouble. But you've got to continue to keep your eyes open to the big picture.
You mentioned all the little things that tend to lead to some of the big things. What are you seeing out there right now?
I'm seeing you've got to really pay attention to your customer. Every customer counts. You've got to pay attention to all the levers that are driving your business, and continue to keep looking down the road for how things are changing and evolving.
Pat?
Tell us about the relationship with your siblings growing up.
Sure. I have two older brothers who tormented me, but also really, really supported me. And they continue to do so today. They expected the very best from me. I was like the little smarty at the end of the line. But they also made me believe I could do big things.
How do you carry forward that support today, and how has it led to your success?
I think I've really enjoyed over my career meeting and mentoring people, and hoping to inspire them and bring them up in a sense, if you can. You can start in one place and end up in a very different.
I understand that you were the first girl to play Little League in your town. What was that all about? And how'd that lay the groundwork for you taking over the Reading Terminal Market as the CEO?
It's funny, Herb. I thought about this amazing place I grew up. The mayor was a woman. The elementary school principal was a female. My dad had one of the first female crab deckhands, and it wasn't really about whether you're the first female or not. It's just somebody needed to do the job. And so I think I've just kind of always moved forward off of that.
Annie, I'm fascinated. You grew up in this small town, and you've both geographically and in terms of where you've worked, expanded so much. So tell me, is your life about getting out of the small town or bringing the small town to the rest of the world? That's
a great question. We laugh. I think when we were kids, we all wanted to get out of that place. But my closest friends are still those people from when I was 5. So I think I've tried to create that sense of community everywhere I go.
So what does it feel like when you're walking around the market? I assume you walk around Reading Terminal Market, right? Yeah. Every day, maybe? Yeah. What does that feel like to you?
Yeah, the Reading Terminal Market has a reputation of being a community of vendors, each that are serving special foods. It is a community. It's its reputation. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt the interview. Please, Annie.
It absolutely is. And it's such a privilege to be here. And we refer to it as the merchant family. And candidly, coming in at the middle of this pandemic, my focus I've not built as many great relationships as I want to, because I've been, working with banks and working with foundations to keep this going. But that's what I love about being here is, you can run down, you can talk to people. I've met the moms, the grandmom, the grandfathers who started the business. I go get my coffee from someone who's the 6th generation in the market.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you had an interest in horses as a kid. How did that manifest, and what was that all about?
I have no idea. I think it was a genetic abnormality, or it was because I get so seasick, I had to go for somewhere that had grass. So I just, I was one of those kids. I loved horses, and somehow I got involved or interested in horse racing, and I was just obsessed with it. And I decided that I was going to, get into that industry.
So your interests you really turned into businesses. You got involved, you liked horses, you got involved with the horse racing industry, and this thing about the community you've actually turned into a business. That is what the Reading Terminal Market's all about, isn't it?
It definitely is. Both our loyal customers kind of see themselves as their own community, and then our merchants absolutely do.
What's the website address for the Reading Terminal Market?
Sure, it's simple. It's readingterminalmarket.org.
Let me have that one more time.
readingterminalmarket.org. We are a nonprofit.
We've been speaking with Annie Allman, General Manager and CEO of Reading Terminal Market, here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website. It's executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, we'll be back in a moment right after this quick break. Don't go away.
You now can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Yes, you can recognize your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Simply visit executiveleadersradio.com, securely enter their info, and we'll reach out to spotlight your deserving business advisors on our nation's leading Business with Heart radio show, executiveleadersradio.com. Don't wait. This radio and online social media and search engine exposure is quite valuable to your advisors. Yes, this radio and online social media exposure is free and quite valuable to your business advisors who deserve to be recognized. Visit executiveleadersradio.com now to nominate your deserving business advisors.
We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohn. We'd like to introduce Rob Ray, co-founder of Littus. Rob, what is Littus? What are you guys doing?
We work with companies that are looking to grow globally and provide market entry strategies to new countries that are efficient and are aligned with partners on the ground who can make that journey worthwhile for them.
Where are you from originally? How many brothers and sisters, and where are you in the pecking order?
I grew up in the Philly suburbs of Drexel Hill. I was the oldest of three. One brother, one sister.
And give me an idea, what were you up to 8 to 14? What kind of stuff were you doing?
Typical sports. I did football, baseball, basketball, street hockey, organized and in the streets with in neighborhood within a very tight-knit community. By the time I was 14, I got my first paying job as a caddy.
Matthew, please give me a hand.
Rob, I'm also the oldest of three. Tell me, what'd that do to you?
It taught me that making mistakes is not a bad thing. I learned a lot from my mistakes. It was.
Give me an example of a mistake that you remember learning a lot from as a kid.
Actually, one of my most vivid childhood memories was the time I got caught in a lie from my parents, and it was not a little fib about something small around the house. It was a big lie. And I learned that, that is not going to get you a shortcut that you're looking for. The disappointment from my parents was devastating, but they also held me accountable for it. And I learned very quickly that getting around something by telling a lie and trying to figure it out later is not really a good option in most cases.
I feel like you're suggesting that telling a lie to your parents and the lesson you learned there has something to do with your business. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it all the time. So when companies are coming into the U.S., they may have a preconceived notion of their business, the market, whatever the case may be. And if you want to get that contract, you may want to tell them that they're right, so then you can work with them and figure it out later. Telling them up front where their holes in their game are, and they may not want to hear it, is always the best route, because then they're going to be able to attack the ground running, be more receptive to input, and hopefully be successful in the long run.
Shannon.
In the green room, you mentioned that caddying was your first job. Curious, what did you enjoy about it, and what did you learn from that experience?
I think I've always been a relatively personable person. So meeting new people, having that dialogue with the other caddies, with the person that you're caddying for, I just have always enjoyed that aspect of any job I've had. And the first one was caddying, and it delivered that. I think hearing insights from mostly business people who were the members of the country club where I was caddying also was very insightful. You heard some things that you didn't want to hear, people on the golf course, but you also had occasion of people who were really interested in sharing stories and wisdom about what they do with a 14 up to 15-year-old boy at that time.
And what did you learn from that experience that you're still carrying with you today?
There's never an opportunity to talk to somebody outside of your world that you should pass up. There's always an opportunity to get some feedback from people who aren't in your world, but you're connected to in some way or another. So I always try to keep that part of my personal practice and business practice.
Mm-hmm. David?
So organized sports, being together as a team, tight-knit community, how do those values come into Littus?
We are all about a community. So when a company is looking to come into the U.S., and for instance, we work with a lot of companies from Ireland. I used to live in Ireland. We interconnect them with Irish businesses who have set up shop here in mostly the Philadelphia region. So bringing that community into their world as they're coming into a new country, in this case, the U.S., is a very valuable business practice. And it's something that I've enjoyed as a person since I was a little kid.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Drummond.
You've spoken with a high value on learning of things that are outside of your world. I'm curious, how young were you when you started traveling?
Well, growing up in Philly, traveling included going to the Jersey Shore, but beyond that world, first trip I ever took was to Disney World. Again, not international. By the time when I first went to college, I went to Johns Hopkins University, and it was a relatively international school. I went to Cardinal O'Hara, was all Catholic Philadelphia area, and all of a sudden I go to a school that has people from 12 different countries. So I started to get this sense that there's a world out there that I'm not familiar with. And that kind of sparked in my mind an interest in that. And then my first job was in sales. So I started to travel there around the US, and then I took a trip to Canada and then to Europe. And, and by the time I was 25, I think I'd been in 6 different countries and didn't turn around from there.
How did the spark for that interest in other worlds carry into what Littus does today?
So what Littus is doing is helping companies who do well in their own country realize that there are opportunities outside of their own country, outside of their home country, and sharing that knowledge and opening people's eyes up to what is out there beyond the familiar, in this case geographically, is really what we're all about, and is core to what I do as a person, let alone as a business.
The core of what you do is what?
Opening their eyes to opportunities outside of their comfort zone and what they're familiar with.
Who did that for you as a kid?
Wow, a couple people. My mom, to some extent, because she was a teacher and she was the first person who told me that, you should look at things outside of your little circle. And because she traveled, in the summertime as a teacher when she was younger. So she was probably the first person who did that. My first boss was actually my uncle. He opened up my eyes as far as when you go into a new world and you go into a new country, a new region, there are people to meet and people to talk to you can learn from. So I had a couple of people within my family actually that were very formative in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Pat?
What was your role in your family growing up with your younger siblings?
I had a typical older brother, but my brother was only a year younger than me. So, he wouldn't necessarily listen to me as much. We were kind of like Irish twins, or, a year apart. We'd knock lumps out of each other. But I certainly did try to provide some guidance. And I think to some extent I did. I was a little bit bigger than him. I'd look after him. It's been much, as adults, it's completely bidirectional. We've learned from each other all the time. We provide guidance and feedback from each other. My sister was 5 years younger than me, and she was very creative. So she opened my eyes. I actually learned a lot more from her than I think she did from me, in understanding that there's things outside of what I'm good at or what I like that I should try to experience. And that learning lesson from her is tremendous. And it's still something I carry with me today.
How does that learning lesson carry forward to what you're doing today at Littus?
So a lot of the problems or challenges with companies that are trying to expand globally is cultural integration or cultural understanding. So getting companies to understand that something that is a normal business practice in your home country may not necessarily be a welcome or an asset in the new country is something that needs to be communicated and understood for businesses. And that's something that we are constantly trying to educate companies about.
Frank?
Rob, you glossed over your sports upbringing, but I know you were a good football player and you played at Johns Hopkins. What position did you play?
I was a center.
And what's the role of a center on a football team?
Well, aside from hiking the ball back to quarterback, is to quickly assess what the defense is laying out and communicate to the other linemen and sometimes the backs what we're looking at and what the adjustments are that you may need to make are.
So how does that ability to manage the offense help you partner with other businesses to make them more efficient?
Oh, we were all about trying to understand what the landscape is in front of them, similar to coming up to the line of scrimmage, identifying things that are different, that are familiar, that you know are going to be easy paths, that are not going to be easy paths, helping them understand that, and then more importantly, effectively communicating that to them.
So let me go deeper. Let's go back to when you were younger. I know your geographic area is known for some legendary coaches. Were you fortunate enough to have such a mentor or coach impact you?
Yeah, I really did. I was very fortunate. So I started 5th grade through 8th grade, CYO football locally here in Philly. And we had a coach, Jim Stewart, who ended up coaching at the school Singhatat for 50 some years. And he was the first coach that I think I ever had who really held you accountable for your actions. He did not mince words, but he also did so with empathy. So he really understood who you were as a person. He was very good at pushing buttons and motivating people in the right way. But he was the first coach I ever had who really instilled pride in what you did, but also didn't, he wasn't, hugging you and telling you everything's great. If you messed up, he let you know and he held you accountable for it. So
was it on the field or off the field lessons that this gentleman had that you remember 35 years later?
It's both. Absolutely. I don't play football anymore, so I can't carry that forward as much, but it's the off the field lessons about, communicating clearly, holding people accountable, but still being empathetic that I still carry with me.
Rob, what's the website address for this organization known as Littus?
Littus, LITTUS.US.
Let me have that one more time.
It's Littus, LITTUS.US.
We've been speaking with Rob Ray, co-founder of Littus here on Executive Leaders Radio. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com. To learn more about our executive leaders, we'll be back in a moment right after this quick break. Don't go away. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen, and we'd like to introduce John Cohn, who happens to be the CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceuticals. John, what is Agronomed Pharmaceuticals? What are you guys up to?
We're a plant-based medicines company, licensed permittee of medical marijuana in Pennsylvania under Agri-Kind and Agronomed Biologics.
And where are you from originally? How many brothers and sisters? Where are you in the pecking order?
I'm the oldest of 3, originally from upstate New York, Vestal, New York, outside of Binghamton.
Okay, 8 to 14 years old. What kind of stuff were you doing?
Oh, like many of my friends in a small town, and played a lot of tennis. I was into bowling. We did the band and the orchestra stuff with school, but I was really much more interested in the sports and actually work.
All righty. Frank, please give me a hand.
John, you mentioned that you had a pretty tough upbringing. What was difficult about it?
A couple things. Some issues between the parents who ultimately ended up divorced. And my father took over the family business from my grandfather, who had built it for about 65 years, and just didn't have the foresight and ultimately led to a bankruptcy.
And did you recognize it was difficult when you were growing up?
Yeah, when I worked in the store, I could see the relationships between my father and grandfather not being overly positive, and they didn't really share the vision on the business.
Yeah, so this negative energy, tough upbringing, how do you think that impacted you?
Well, I think it motivated me to be really successful. It forced me to kind of grow up very quickly. And, working in the business, I got to learn a lot from my grandfather, and, really led to a lot of the drive that took me through the majority of my career.
How's that translate to you bringing medical practice products to market?
Well, actually, the perseverance, what it takes, I think, to build a medical marijuana company, especially in a limited license state, you've just got to have perseverance, drive, and vision. And I think those 3 things came out very, very strong for my childhood.
David?
So John, you mentioned growing up being a bowler, tennis player, into karate, all individual sports, highly mental mindset, very motivational. How do those values and traits come into what you're doing today?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think it led very strongly into my earlier career as an independent consultant, where much of what I did was individual contributorship. But as I grew, I started managing teams of 30, 40, 50 people. And while those sports they tend to be individual, I was a doubles tennis player as opposed to single. So I was really a very strong doubles team player where I wasn't ranked very highly in singles. Bowling, same thing. I had a very high average, actually got a bowling scholarship, which is don't often mention, but I wasn't even the best on our team. And the team as a whole is what really, that camaraderie and that feeling is what kind of made me thrive.
Shannon?
John, how young were you when you first started making money, and what were you doing?
I was 14, partially because of my upbringing. I think, my goal was to buy a car when I was 16. And I realized being in a small town, there weren't a lot of jobs. I started a lawn mowing landscaping company with one friend of mine. Two of us cutting 15 or so lawns a week, up for about 3 years when I was able to sell the company at 17 with 57 accounts.
And it sounds like when you're motivated, you get things done. I'm curious, what motivates you today?
Well, today it's a little bit of the same. I have 2 children, and getting them through college and looking toward retirement. But moreover, it really is for me about philanthropy and doing what I like.
What do you mean by philanthropy?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by philanthropy? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the cannabis industry, there's an awful lot of community drive, both to help patients, but also to help local community with jobs, opening up facilities that employ dozens of people. The states like to have these facilities in economically distressed areas. So we opened both the bars in Chester. We've employed about 100 people to date in one of our facilities and another 20 in our first dispensary. We're looking at have about 400 by the end of next year.
Ben?
John, you mentioned you were the oldest of 3, and I think you had a 13-year gap with your siblings. What was that experience like?
Well, it made me grow up very quickly. I was sort of the world kind of revolved around me as an only child for 13 years, and then you become you get to realize that it's not all about you. Changing diapers and watching the kids and really getting to know your siblings, but with the 13-year-old gap in there, it's not like having a brother 2-3 years younger than you as your best friend.
What does that realization have to do with what you do today?
I think it opened up from it helped evolve me from being a strong individual contributor to being more of a team player and being able to manage teams.
Pat?
You mentioned your grandfather was a role model of yours growing up. What was it about him that you admired?
The hard work and the dedication. He was off the boat at 6 years old from Russia, supported his family of 6. He was like the middle of 6 kids, but he was the primary contributor to the family.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who started a business themselves, what do you think he would say today, seeing what kind of business you're growing now?
Well, based on the fact that he really was amazed at the lawn mowing experience and the fact I was able to put myself through school on that, unfortunately passed away a few years after that, I think he would just be fully amazed to see what we built with respect to our current businesses.
Matthew?
John, you've got this perseverance, dedication thing going with you. I want to talk a little bit about tennis to see something about this. How many hours a day were you playing tennis as a kid?
During the season, about 2 to 3 hours a day, even if we didn't have matches. But during the summer, we would play 8 to 12 hours a day. We would run our bikes down to the courts, and we would literally play from dawn till dusk.
And was that mostly games or mostly practice?
During the season, it was mostly practice, just over and over again. During the summer, it was games and practice.
But so tell me about that in that practice when you're hitting the same shot over and over and over again. Like, how do you keep your mind on that? How do you get yourself to do that?
Well, it's almost like playing golf, which I do now. You hit that one good shot, it keeps you coming back, right? So nobody can play, unless you're a pro, you're not going to hit 18 good shots on 18 holes. But for me, it was always just trying to continually improve. And next time you hit that one ball that hits the corner with the right amount of topspin, you remember that. You strive to keep going back and do better than that last time.
And what is that sense of perseverance of practicing the shot? What's that got to do with running Agronomed?
Well, it's like in any business, especially a new industry like this, there's no book on how to do it right or necessarily wrong. You have to look and see what others do, what they do right, what they do wrong, and try to learn from their mistakes as well as your own mistakes. And what it really results in is reactive adjustment. So, you do something, you look at it, and, you either improve it or you change it or you don't do it anymore. And I think that same thing holds true in tennis.
And it's fascinating when you talk about reacting to things and adjusting, because when you were a kid, you talked about the bankruptcy in the family business. Was that from not being able to react and adjust? And were you able to see that?
Yeah, from my perspective, I was able to see it. I grew up in Binghamton, as I mentioned. Dick's Sporting Goods was my dad's biggest competitor, and they were a 3,000 square foot store, one store, who eventually became three, who eventually became the big box store that we all knew. My father and them competed directly in very small businesses, but yet they adapted and they changed with the times. Whereas my father continued to sell big and tall suits to customers who weren't big and tall anymore or didn't wear suits. So it just became one of those things where you have to adapt if you want to survive.
And going through that bankruptcy, I'm guessing it was a difficult thing. How did you react to that? Did that cause anxiety or anything like that?
It did, although I was in college at the time, so it was caused more anxiety because of the impacts it had on my brother and sister, who were still at home and younger. But certainly, it's an upheaval.
And I'm curious, does how you deal with that and how you deal with the anxiety and the depression, does that have anything to do with what you're doing today with Agronomed and cannabis?
Well, that's a great question, and you couldn't have hit it more on the head. So, as a prior adult use, potentially occasional recreational user, I never really understood the medical benefits of cannabis as a kid. And when in my IT career, my former life from what I do today, spent a lot of time in Amsterdam and was fortunate enough to try about 250, 300 strains while there and realized some cause anxiety while some relieve anxiety. And some, make you gain weight, some make you lose weight. So to that end, I found some strains that help with the anxiety, became the way of self-medicating, and at the same time was diagnosed with diabetes 2 years later.
John, what is the website? We're running out of time. What is the website address for Agronomed?
Agronomed is AGRONOMED.com.
We've been speaking with John Cohn, CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceuticals. Back in a moment, right after this quick break. We're back. You're listening to Executive Leaders Radio. This is your host, Herb Cohen. We'd like to introduce Wamis Singhatat, who is the CEO and CTO of ActiveProtective. Wamis, what is ActiveProtective? What are you guys doing?
We are an emerging venture-backed startup developing a very unique connected wearable device to enable older adults to age in place safely.
Excellent. Where are you from? How many brothers and sisters? And where are you in the pecking order?
From Akron, Ohio, rubber city capital of the world. I am the youngest of three siblings.
And tell me, 8 to 14 years old, what kind of stuff were you up to 8 to 14?
Your typical running around with my friends. I played soccer, I played tennis, but my real hobby and my passion was skateboarding. So from really sunrise to sunset, that's what I did. Got my first job when I was 14.
All righty. Pat, give me a hand.
Wamis, you mentioned in the green room that you were one of the few Asian families in Akron, and from time to time you accompanied your mom in her business cleaning houses. How did that affect you?
Yeah, certainly being one of the few Asian families, you're sort of involuntarily non-conforming. Let's put it that way. And, it was tough at the beginning, but over time, I became to accept and then eventually embrace it. So I really kind of consider nonconformity as one of my key attributes that's enabled me to be successful. And then in terms of what I see with my mom, very hardworking. Like you said, she cleaned houses for a living, and that got me to see how, let's say, the better half lives. I grew up, with a family of 5 in a 900 square foot home, so pretty modest. But that gave me this vision and drive to aspire to be financially successful.
Mm-hmm. Frank?
Allman, so I understand that today you have 29 patents on devices and products. Tell me, how young were you when you first recognized the creative ability within yourself to solve problems?
Yeah, well, at the age of 10, we would just ride around and find any pieces of wood we could and get the nail and hammer and just build skateboard ramps. So I think that was my first outlet for using my creative skills at building.
So what motivated that? What was the process that you used?
It was just imagination, right? We're full of energy and passion and, wanting to just build something that we could all enjoy and have fun with.
Mm-hmm. Matthew?
Skateboarding is an interesting and somewhat different sport for people who are on the show. I'm curious, what do you like about skateboarding?
It's a very, very individual sport. It's just the dedication to mastery, I think, that comes along with it. We literally would spend just hours, days trying to master just one trick. And you hit that trick and it's just nothing at the age of 10 that, is more personally fulfilling. And, I've taken that with me to my professional career and just, looking at setting high, lofty goals and just working hard towards hitting that and the personal satisfaction that comes with it, as well as everyone on my team.
There's also a nonconformist element to it that you talked about earlier. Tell me how the nonconformist background of skating helps to explain who you are today.
Yeah, I think it really gets to the point of trying to see things differently. So, that's, really the reason for the patents. Having a different view on a problem really gives you the opportunity to come up with new novel solutions.
Shannon?
In your bio, it says that your passion is redefining the standard of care. Where does this idea of thinking outside the box come from?
I think it came from my dad. He was a civil engineer, retired now. And, he would just use his creative talents to really find solutions to problems. So, for example, when we were younger, he bought a family van. Instead of buying it, fully decked out, he realized that he could buy it in a cargo version and build the seats, the chairs himself. So, witnessing that level of creativity and ingenuity as a young child, I think also inspired me.
So, Wamis, when you're stuck at something at work, stumped on something, what do you hear your father saying?
Keep pushing through it. And, nothing that's worth anything comes easy. And, that's really what I've tried to dedicate myself to with the culture that we try to instill amongst the team. And, startup life is hard. And especially when you're trying to solve big problems, you're really feeling like you're trudging through the mud quite commonly, and you just got to keep going.
Ben?
Almost. The sport of skating is non-traditional in that it's very much so the objective is about mastering a specific trick. For you mentioned in the green room, the 360-degree ollie. How did your experience mastering that specific trick or other tricks translate into you having 29 patents and doing what you do in your career today?
Yeah, we work on, problems that, are meaningful in whatever, the industry we're in as engineers. And, I think that requires a lot of discipline, a lot of focus, and just continued perseverance. So, mastering and Ollie taking, tens, maybe hundreds of hours to do that. There really are very strong parallels with what we do in industry and trying to really solve these hard problems from a technical standpoint.
Mm-hmm. David?
Wamis, you mentioned from a young age just your drive for financial success and financial independence. How old were you when you first started making money, and what did you want to do with that money, and how does that still drive you today?
Yeah, I was 14 when I got my first job bussing tables at an Italian restaurant. And the drive there was really to buy a guitar amp. That was my number one goal. I was, creatively into music as well and writing and formed a band with my friends. And it's just, I think, instilling that hard work, pays off, and that, you've got to just, put your head down, put your, elbow grease into whatever you're doing to eventually get to success, to what you're looking for.
Wamis, how many members were there in that band, and what was your role amongst the members?
4 of us. I was the guitarist. And, I can't say I was a good guitarist. I was pretty horrible at the time, but, just.
Were you the organizer? Were you the organizer of the group?
It was myself and my good friend, John, the bassist.
Is there a parallel between your role with the other band members back then and who you are now?
Yeah, I think so. I was, had a big part in writing a lot of the music, and I think there are parallels with the creative process and work and patents and technical challenges that we have to solve.
So earlier when we were talking informally in the green room, you mentioned that there's that you live Buddhism, and perhaps I'm mistaken about the way I'm framing that. Could you correct me where I'm mistaken?
No, I think that's a perfect way of phrasing it, Herb. Buddhism, to me, I grew up in a Buddhist household. My parents are, pretty devout in practicing the religion. However, I really always only saw it as a philosophy in life, right? Based on karma. It's sort of give merit to gain merit is the general philosophy of Buddhism. And I've actually used that life philosophy to help drive my career decisions. And I've gravitated towards trying to find ways that I could use my talents to help people. And I think we're doing just that at ActiveProtective.
That's interesting. So you think business can be a win-win as opposed to a win-lose?
I really do. Yeah, there's, a lot of great opportunities out there. I think if you have the right mindset and, you've got the opportunity recognition lens, and then you go about it in an ethical way, I think it actually can be a win-win. Absolutely.
So business doesn't have to be a win-lose. Business can be ethical. And that's really the space that you're coming from, huh?
And that's the culture that we're trying to build at ActiveProtective.
That's the culture you're trying to build at ActiveProtective, is this culture of everybody can win together. Nobody's got to lose. It's interesting. And
that's right.
Mm-hmm. And that comes from your background, as well as, your unconventional background and your ability to think outside the box. You're comfortable being unconventional. And this philosophy of Buddhism, which is everybody can win together. What's the website address of this organization called ActiveProtective?
It's tangobelt.com. That's the name of the product that we've developed.
How do you spell that?
TANGOBELT.com.
We've been speaking with Wamis Singhatat, CEO and CTO of ActiveProtective. And I'd like to thank my co-hosts. Well, actually, who else do we have on the show today? Let's go run down the guests first, Matthew.
Yeah, we've had a great show today, Herb. We started with Annie Allman, who's the general manager and CEO of the first place I take every visitor to Philadelphia, the Reading Terminal Market. After that, we had Rob Ray, the co-founder of Littus. We followed Rob with John Cohn, who's the CEO of Agronomed Pharmaceuticals. And just now we finished up with Wamis Singhatat, who's the CEO and CTO of ActiveProtective.
I'd like to thank my co-host Shannon Lane, Newmark, Pat Riley, USI, Frank Hennessy, Premier Planning Group, Matthew Shapiro, Obermeyer, Ben Drummond, D2 Integrated Solutions, and David Epstein, Intelligent Staffing, for giving me a hand structuring the questions, hopefully providing our listening audience an educational and entertaining show. I'd like to thank our listening audience for listening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a radio show. Don't forget to visit our website, executiveleadersradio.com, to learn more about our executive leaders. Thank you for joining us today, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.